Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And we are doing a study group for the mashup of the Foundation for Mystical Healing and the mystical approach to the chakras. I think that was kind of a fun class this last weekend. I hope you thought so too. But let's go ahead and share experiences and ask questions. And, with what time we have left, I have a little protocol I'd like us to do. So go ahead and unmute, type in, fire away.
Go ahead, Robert.
Hey, Robert.
Hey, Greg. I want to tell you about my experience Sunday night
Oh, good. Okay.
because so unlike me, at 7 o'clock at night, I felt like I needed to go to sleep and sleep forever. And I said, I
Yeah,
thought if I did that, I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, and that's a bit earlier than usual. So
right.
I went in and took a half an hour nap, set the alarm, made sure I woke up. But I still went to bed at 9:30, which is earlier than normal for me. There's two parts to this amazing part. I slept for 6.5 hours straight, and I never moved the whole time I slept.
Wow, that's some good sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little
And,
jealous. I
and
think I
you
might
know,
have to go back through and do that Sunday class again myself.
it was interesting. And there's this part of me, the human part of me says, "Oh, I got to do the class again so that it happens again and I can sleep good."
Right.
And I know that that's not how it works, but I also know that there's pieces I need to keep redoing.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we're having this study group to have something new to
A-
try and go through it.
And I would say, like, it might not always be the same protocol, but like bouncing around and doing different parts of the body, I think that can be very helpful. And it's one of those things that, like, you get your body to a place and you're like, oh, I got some deep rest. And you do kind of like sink deeper into whatever that is. And, the next time that same protocol might not do that, but a different protocol, because your body's in a different place, your emotions, your mind, whatever it is, a lot of times it's the body. The
Yeah,
body's in a different place. And so then you kind of go through and you do a little bit of a different protocol, and it's like, I hit the magic again, and
right, right.
yeah.
So I'm excited to do this again, but I also have sort of a very general question
Hmm.
in terms of mashups.
Uh-huh.
Here we're taking the chakras, and the colors, and
Uh-huh.
combining them. I know, if you think of all the classes we've had, there's many different layers and perspectives on
Right.
healing.
Right.
Is there a list of all of those? Not necessarily by class name, but, you know, or programming, for instance, is one. But what are all these
Like
layers?
that you could add to this? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, what are the layers that I could experiment with?
So if you wanted to experiment, org program definitely is a thing. And I kind of want to process this, and we are going to do like a deeper dive, like we've been talking about in the org program and the work with the aura. Like and so I think that would be good to like experiment with you right now. And the other one that is a very good mix into this mashup would be the resonance class. With like dealing with the whole like defense mechanism and things like that. Um, Part of what happens when you're working the chakras and you're working the color, like that mashup, is it's flushing out a lot of like excess homeostatic emotion and how the emotion gets generated. And the thing is like when we think of healing, we just think like, oh, that got better and I'm back to normal, or whatever it might be. But really, if we look at it from the point of view of energetics, when we're having the health issue, there's a little bit of like less soul energy in that area. And when you go through and you really heal that, really heal it on a deep level, especially more than just the body resolving it over a period of time, like getting over a cold or flu, but you really do some deep healing. You're actually in that time frame, you're increasing like soul energy into the body to actually make that heal. So like I keep making this motion, it's like soul energy is descending deeper into the body. And we have this, like we were just discussing this a couple of days ago, like we were doing like kind of a meditation but with special tools. And so it massively increases, the stimulation of the blue pearl, and more soul energy drops down into the body. But then what happens afterwards is, because so much more soul energy comes deeper into the body, it is in a way like purifying and like healing the body. But what starts to happen is you still have like a primal response. This part of your body that's very primal or primordial still responds to the descent of that energy, right? And so what happens is it generates lower emotion. And so that's why we really fixate on those lower emotions, so that if you were to put like somebody under the microscope and go, okay, why doesn't some of these parts heal faster or better, or whatever that might be, and maybe not responsive to a symptom oriented approach, or they just don't get better. And we all have that stuff, like it's all something, but it might not be in the whole body, but in areas, because of pain or whatever, there's a lot of, or excess homeostatic emotion in that area. It could be stress, it could be anger, it could be whatever, but it's like it's a kind of anger that it's not even like your emotions or your mind, it even registers, because it's primal. It's very, very lower nature, and that lower nature thing is always there. And so when the energy descends in, part of what you're doing with like the colors and the chakras is, yes, you're helping organs work better, and yes, you're doing all the things that we talk about. It's anti-inflammatory, it's anti-spasmodic, it does all these things and makes the energy more refined. But part of what you're doing is you're also fleshing out those homeostatic emotions that aren't allowing for the soul energy to descend more. But when that soul energy descends, there's always a little bit of a pushback, and it's tied to like why they talk about like the awakening of the Kundalini, or the conquering of the cobra, or which is Kundalini, or the Kuan Yin riding the dragon. It is conquering that pushback. That's basically all it is. And so in more like Christian or esoteric theosophical things, they'll refer to it as the sacred fire. But that descent is um it's purifying something and stimulating something that actually accelerates our spiritual growth and our healing. And they call the Kundalini energy sacred fire, but also when when you look at it from different perspectives, and some different Christian religions, and even sometimes in the theosophical practices, they'll talk about the descent of the spiritual energy as the living water, and the living water tempers that fire, you know. And so going back to what you were saying before, it's like the intellect would love to be able to go like, I can do this routine, and ah, but it's a more like, you know hunting for mushrooms in the forest, or like, tracking an animal, or, trying to get your dog that ran out of the house. Like there's no technique. There's just finding the dog or finding the mushrooms, or it's a lot more like that. And so, that's why a lot of times we go through and we go, okay, let's have the experience. And even the idea of the mashups, I started to go into just like, let's just do a bunch of protocols. And I was like, this is kind of a fun weekend. Let's take time exploring not just with the mashup of the techniques, but the idea of like how to do it. Like get used to like, okay, what happens if I mix this, this, and this? You know, sometimes it's amazing and sometimes it's it
Right.
happens, and but that constantly tweaking the combinations, it's the whole idea of astrology, and it's the whole idea of numerology, and you even feng shui. Like you never go, this is a science, if I do this, this, and this, it will work. There's some of that to a certain degree, but there's always these little tweaks, and there's always these things where like that worked then, but now this is in play. And so now I got to look at it from a different perspective. And you're always kind of trying to shift perspectives. And that is really about developing more of that intuitive mind and that ability to like kind of see something and go, "Ah, I couldn't tell you why, but that's what I got to do, you know? And, it seems weird at first, but after a while, uh, you get it. Like, I remember like in my like I was like early 20s, and one of my teachers told me, he goes, you have to go find your stick. And I was like, what? Like, because we're having a little one-on-one. He goes, you got to go find your stick for your altar. And I go, like, what's it supposed to look like? Or like, what kind of wood? And he's like, no, you got to go find your stick. And I go, I don't even know what you're talking about. And he goes, trust me, you'll know it when you see it. And I was super in my head about it. I was like, what the F is this stick? And what am I supposed to do with the stick? And what's the purpose of the stick? And, all these things. And I, I was really in my head about it, and I got frustrated. I just gave up on it. And about 10, it was probably 15 years later, which is kind of embarrassing, but um, I kind of started to understand what he was talking about. And it's just like all of a sudden, I would just start seeing things and items, and eventually I saw the stick, and it was like, ah, that's the stick. What I'm going to use it for, I have no idea, but that stick belongs on the altar for some reason. And y- you know, I don't know that the stick really had any amazing meaning other than there was a harmony in the whole that recognized something outside of itself that was like, ah, this is supposed to be in place.
It
And
it
really
wasn't
what's that?
it wasn't just that stick. It was that
Right.
stick with everything else.
Right. It was really more about the harmony of the whole, like that's why we can't kind of talked about like, oh, self-acceptance and really change is just embracing other parts of yourself. It's not about coming something different. And it really is like waking up these other pieces of us that recognize things or connect with things in our environment, our processes, like that stick. And I honestly, I think more than anything, it was just a moment of everything was in balance and I just connected with the stick. I don't think the stick was anything like special. It was like the past, the present, the future were all in alignment. My intellect and intuition were all in alignment, and I saw the stick for what it was, and I had a connection to the stick. It was more about that connection than it was about finding some piece of wood to stick on my altar. Like it was just about that connection. And those are not something that you can have like all the time. They kind of come and they go, they come and they go.
Right.
But what you're trying to do is, can I call it up on a dime? Can I can I bring it up when, you know, the fire's been turned up or the gun's to my head or, whatever it is? Can I bring it up? And
An oil from each class, and those are the
yeah,
ones I need that day.
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
That's why even the idea, because I still try to, because I know my mind. My mind's, I can be very left brain, very, very left brain. And that idea of even like having say you're treating a shoulder or something, you go, okay, rotate the different things you use, right? Because even in a way, you're still kind of tricking the intellect to go, okay, but like sometimes one's going to be better than the other. And, like, yeah, it might need a little pain thing and it might need a little lymph work and it might need a little spasm work. But then sometimes I'll throw something else on there and it's amazing. And like, Samantha go, why did you use that? And I'll go, I don't know. I really don't know, like, but I knew that it would work. And it's good to have the intellect. It's good to be able to know the whys and the reasons and the facts and the data. We do that really well, in the West. We do that really well. But that other piece, it's hard to teach because it's not just an accumulation of information. It's almost like going back to like teaching somebody how to hunt for mushrooms or just see something and be able to recognize it and not really be prepped for it. Like, if something just happens in the moment, you're able to embrace that. I mean, it's kind of what like falling in love is like, you know? You're not really kind of looking for it, or maybe you are, and things go on, and then all of a sudden there's this moment that just happens, and then that moment just keeps like this momentum going for a while that turns into whatever it turns into. And so it's a lot like that. It's a lot like being able to like fall in love with something kind of in a way. Yeah.
so when I asked the question, you talked about org programming and resonance
Uh-huh.
being together with these two classes.
Uh-huh.
Are there other clusters of classes that work together?
Oh yeah. Most classes, a lot of times, even like how I teach, like there'll be a little theme for a couple months. Yeah.
Yes.
Like, so a lot of times there's stuff like that. And it might not always be constant, but like there's a theme within the 2 or 3 month period of time. Yeah, like I could put little clusters together for you where you guys could start doing your own little mashups. Yeah, definitely. I pretty much every class has like two classes related to it, at least,
Okay.
if not even more.
Are there some that don't go together?
They just wouldn't go to, you ever go to a dinner party and everybody's nice, but you just don't click with somebody. It's a little bit like that. It's not that they're like going to be like bad. It's just that they won't really quite click with each other.
Right.
That's about all it would do. Like it would still do something, but it just wouldn't be like magic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I- As I was experiencing the class over the weekend and even into Monday, the feelings and the I'll guess I say joy and elation from having slept like I did.
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh, I wonder what else is possible.
Right. So
And
like to build on what you're saying, like healing spirit, healing with light and love, life alter, resonance, the one coming up, um, the power of realization, they all belong to the same club. You know what I mean? Like you can mix and match them quite well. And the chakra stuff kind of can integrate into there. The ones that we're doing with regeneration, the mashup of three free classes, and that could like fit in there some way somehow. Yeah.
Eh, the part of me that sees patterns in things is asking about patterns
Mhm.
and trying to, I know there's more and I know I can wait. I know they're going to happen, but there's this, the intellect's like, so what are they? I want to know them right now.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
eh,
and it depends on what you're chasing. It depends on what you're going after. You know what I mean? So, like somebody who's brand new to this stuff, the combination might be very different than what your combination would be. And so, you know, yes, they'll produce results, but it's kind of like starting to be able to meet the person with where they're at. You know what I mean? And if you want to take it deeper, because not everybody wants to take it deeper. I mean, maybe they want to take a little bit deeper, but I mean, it's not always even in healings and stuff. I mean, I remember Master Choa pulling me aside one time, and he said, "Not everybody that seeks out healing wants to be healed." And I'm like, "What?" And we started talking it out, and you know, over the years, I did notice that, people, of course they want to feel better, but people's idea of what was healing or what was getting better was a lot of times very different, you know, very, very different. The most common one is um, people think like spirituality or healing is getting what they want. Like this is what I think should happen. I'm healing because I'm getting what I want. And from the point of intellect, that kind of makes a bit of sense. But from the point of the soul, that's just nuts. Like it's just nuts. It doesn't allow for there to be growth or experience. You're going, okay, I'm gonna keep doing the same thing over and over again, and I'm just gonna maintain this, and I don't want change, and I don't want this. I just want to play this out until, the end of my time or whatever. There's no development, uh, the personality, the psyche, the soul. But it's like in mystical practices, I mean, that is like what you would call somebody being asleep. And, you know, no judgment on that. Like sometimes the last incarnation or two were really rough and just sleep is what they need. And so, when that happens like in sessions or even in the classes and stuff, you notice that a lot of times I'll answer people in different ways. They might ask me the same question, but I'll say different things to different people. And, part of it is just that, like they're in different places. And, you know, if somebody's really hungry and really pushing for something, I'll give them more information. But if somebody's not, I don't want to throw them in crisis. So I'll say something really, really soft, really gentle, and just do this and maintain what you're doing. And when they're ready, they're ready. And so um, it
the,
allows you to adjust and adapt to the different situations. I mean, I go back to, you know, I had this longtime client and she came in every week And, the first couple of times I had a little talk with her about like, okay, this is what I think is happening, what's going on. And I could tell by her body language, she was not into it. And so I go, well, let's just see what happens. And she came every week for 6 years. And at the about the 6 year mark, she goes, you remember that thing we talked about? I go, yeah. And she goes, I think I'm ready to address it. Had I forced it, I probably would have pushed her away from her even attempting that 6 years later. Because that's the thing is if you push somebody too hard, they don't get better. They kind of double down on what was happening.
Right.
And so
The
that's why,
resistance.
yeah, so that's why, I mean, you kind of you let people do it at their own pace. And I'll verbally say that when I'm treating people with trauma. I was like, there's no set pace. We're not gonna like try to crank this out in 6 weeks or something. If we do it fast, great. If we do it slow, great. You set the pace. You tell me how you want to do it. You know, like of course I'm going to do the techniques and the the healing part, but sometimes people would make a shift and they're like, I need to sit with this for a while. And it might be months, but you know, that's the healthiest thing for them. Because if I just keep going push, 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 at some point they're going to push back. It's just like how we were talking about, like the soul energy comes in. At some point, the primal part goes, I'm pushing back on this. I don't like this. It's the same thing with the healing. It is the same thing. You start to heal something. You get in on these really wounded parts. You get in on these really primal parts. If you think about like talking about yarrow helping with deep-seated wounds, you know, and like, they talk about like wounds of in the old days, wounds made by iron instruments or something like that. And you go, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then you'll hear like when we're doing class and stuff, and somebody will say, "Oh, this situation's a little bit triggering, or this situation, I get a little upset or something." And sometimes we'll use Melissa, but sometimes the go-to is Yarrow. And the idea is that the reason why Yarrow has such a deep impact on really deep wounds is that when you bring in the healing energy or the soul energy into that area, there is a primal pushback, because it's usually the primal parts that are wounded. It's like it's not your higher nature, it's like things down in the lower nature that are wounded. And so you get on them and they act like a wounded animal. Like, they push back, they growl, they show their teeth and whatever. And so yarrow is very calming and soothing to that, so that a little more um, uh, soul energy can go into that area. And so, call it intuition or the healing processes, whatever it might be, but that's what's happening. And I find it extra interesting that they don't just say like weapons, they say weapons made of iron. And the reason being, like when you use like tools like my Dorje, for example, like you would use like brass, and you would use like sometimes copper or silver because it's conductive, but the middle of this Dorje is iron. And the reason why, it's just a very old Dorje, but the reason why is that iron, more than any of the other metals, concretizes spiritual energy into the form. Like it just, and so that's why iron is also related to Saturn. Like Saturn's about learning lessons, manifestation of karma, spiritualizing, kind of whether you like it or not. And I find it interesting that it's weapons of like, tools of iron or weapons of iron that, would cause the wound. And it's because yarrow is super good for those like deep internal wounds that are so primal that, because a lot of times we're healing things that consciously we don't understand. Like like our mind knows that there's something there, but it doesn't know what it really is. Like it has an explanation kind of, and there's feelings there, but like when you get in on it, sometimes they're not even from this lifetime. There's a lot of times you're healing something that is very, very old, you know, very, very old. And you take like somebody who was maybe a victim of homicide, for example. It might take 5 to 8 lifetimes to heal that. It's not going to be, oh, they passed and they go up and have an interaction with the soul and they come back down and it's done. That takes a while, you know. That takes a while.
One of the modalities that I've studied uh, talks about things passed down generationally through the
Sure.
blood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so experiences of my great great grandparents in some way may have brought toxicity to the
True.
body, and
That's
that's
very true.
passed down,
Yeah, yeah, it's very true.
as well
Yeah.
as the resistance to things that they experience. So it's not all
Right.
bad,
Right.
but that's one of the things that I found very interesting in this one methodology. But another thing
Is it
too,
because like if you think of the generational thing, like if you think about it like from the idea of like plants or something like that, that it's almost like the seed or the generations are an organism unto itself. It's like we see it as like this is my lifetime, that was my dad's lifetime, that was my grandpa's lifetime, that was that. And yes, that is true. But also those were just manifestations of almost like a bigger, I don't want to say organism, but like a bigger thing. And it was just a manifestation, 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 manifestation. And that really goes to the idea of like how we perceive God. Like in the Christian and Hebrew traditions, the well, I shouldn't say this, not just Christian or Hebrew, religious. Like it depends on the traditions, but they'll see God as the emanation of like that which sustains life or that which sustains the universe. And like growing up Christian, like I grew up Catholic for a little tiny bit. We'd see Christ and it was like Christ was the emanation of you know this love aspect or this aspect of God, whatever it might be. But really, if you look at it from some of the Eastern traditions, like there's all these different aspects of God. And even in the Catholic tradition, there's a little bit of that because you have all the saints, you know? And in the indigenous cultures, they'll even refer to like aspects of nature as being like an aspect of God, which is true, but it's more of this like flow of an energy or a stream of consciousness or a nature. It's kind of like how they talk about it in Star Wars, where the force flows through everything and you can tap into the force and they have all these explanations of what the force is and everything, but it's this flow or this movement or this thing that penetrates all. And really what's happening is like when you see the different beings like in the Buddhist or Hindu or whatever that might be, is that they're representing a stream of consciousness or a kind of nature that is manifesting. They're a byproduct of riding that wave. And so when you see Christ is the byproduct of that that flow of energy or that flow of nature or that flow of consciousness. And Christ becomes a manifestation of it, not the source of it. And so that's why you'll see in the different traditions where, there'll be different beings and they'll go, but in this area they're like this, but in this area like Kuan Yin, and in the Tibetan tradition they're more masculine, and Chinese and Japanese traditions Kuan Yin's more feminine, right? It's a manifestation of this energy, but Kuan Yin's a reflection of that manifestation, and that manifestation can take on many different faces depending on like where it's flowing to, and it's like it goes back to that stick. Like it's masculine in Tibet because at that time Tibet needed to be cleaned up. In China and Japan, things had been cleaned up and there had been things in place. Things were already being refined. So then Kuan Yin appears more feminine and there's more of a love aspect. In Tibetan, Kuan Yin is very willful. Like it's mopping up a mess. Like, not that the Tibetans are a mess, but there was a time where they were, you know, invading everybody around them and plundering and doing all that, and that was the mess. And so the manifestation of that aspect of God was like, we got to clean this up, right? And so even when we look at the idea of the healing energies, you know, sometimes it's about the law of cycles and divine intelligence. Sometimes it's about producing stability. Sometimes it's about realization and creative destruction. Because really, like the healing aspect of like a deeper healing is that power of realization. And it's not necessarily about realizing things in society, but just realizing like what's true and what's not, and what's just you keeping yourself busy, and what's like your loved ones around you, much more important than you know what football game you went to on the weekend. And it doesn't mean you don't enjoy the football game, but there's other things that you know have more impact on you. And at some point, you might be put in a position to choose. And do you choose the football game or you choose the loved one? You know what I mean? And it's not a thing that you can teach like based on pieces of facts or information. It's almost like you're teaching a process, because that's what it is. It's a process. I mean, learning is a process. Learning is tapping into that flow. Intuition is tapping into that flow. You know, innovating is tapping into that flow. Like, you'll see somebody who, like, man, they're just like crazy innovative and everything. It's like they're just surfing. They're just riding a wave. That's all they're doing. There's a being in you don't ever really see it in anything written, except for maybe like texts that are in inner teachings. That's like probably in some cave on some scroll or something. But there's this being that doesn't really have like facial features. Like you can kind of see that it's a face, but there's not really facial features, and they just look like they're like liquid silver, liquid metal. And this being, it's usually taught in oral traditions, but usually they don't really talk about it too much until somebody has perceived this being. But the being is able to shift between like all the different realms or all the different stages. Like they're able to travel. It's kind of like what in the Bible they talked about Jacob's ladder, but even more so. And all that being does is just ride the wave. It's just riding waves. That's all it
Is it
does.
is it creating them or amplifying them, or does it just ride them?
I think it just rides them. I mean, it's such an abstract idea. There's not really a lot taught about it. Like,
Okay.
you might get a perception of it, but it's almost like the one time that I talked about it with a teacher, uh, he basically said, yeah, that being does more than the human mind can perceive. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what it felt like. And I would say I just had a flash. I didn't even have like a big, like, oh, look at what that's doing. I just, perceived something. And I was like, God, it almost looks like it's out of a comic book or something. But, you know,
You talk about that flow,
yeah.
that wave, so to speak,
Mhm.
and I know there's times I'm on it because I look back and go, that was supposed to be hard and it became so
Right,
easy.
right,
And I didn't even realize I had accomplished what I did until I looked back.
right. And,
And then,
and think of like how people talk about the runner's high or,
yes,
like whatever. That's just them riding the wave. You see
yeah.
somebody like innovating like in science or on a computer or something, and they just do something like kind of like, guys, like brilliant. What is that? It's they just were riding a wave. They tapped into that wave for a moment. Yeah.
So there's all this part of me that really enjoys that wave. That it's not that it's easy because it's not. It's usually a process that's very challenging in some aspect,
Yeah.
whether it's physical or mental.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It's challenging, but
Right.
when you look back, it's almost like euphoric.
Yeah. Oh, it's very euphoric. Yeah. I would say bliss is tied to that. Like, having bliss or stillness or I think stillness is more about being able to ride the wave, but the bliss is like I'm on the wave, you know. For me, early meditation was I'd get so excited that I was on the wave that I would pull myself off the wave. I mean, it's sad, but it's true. And then after a while, I didn't get smart and go, oh, I need to really let go. I just got tired and frustrated and I kind of gave up. Like I was just like, this meditation thing, I just can't do it. And then when I gave up and I didn't have the agenda, all of a sudden I started being able to ride the wave a little bit. Yeah.
There's this part of, I guess you could say, giving up control,
Yeah. Yeah.
being,
And
being,
again, we all have these primal drives. Like
yeah.
I think I told you guys the story about Imaho where, he went to this monastery and very well-known lama was training him and giving him instructions. And if they said, okay, do this mantra for 4 hours, he was like, I'm doing it for 8. And they said, okay, do these exercises for one day. And he'd go, I'm doing 2, whatever it was. And he goes, in the middle of doing this like really intense practice, he goes, I had a realization, this is all bullshit. And he said, like, I pulled my stuff together and I went and I talked to the Lama and I just said, I think this is all a bunch of BS and you're just giving me busy work. And he said the Lama got really uncomfortable and kind of moved around in his chair a little bit. And he goes, yeah, you're right. It is. It's totally busy work because there is those primal drives that as much as you try to do something when they're super engaged, it's just going to fight whatever you do. So you exhaust it. You you do busy work. And so going back to the repetition, a lot of times that's what the repetition is you're just trying to exhaust that primal drive so that you can go, ah, I've connected to the stick. I've connected to this. I've connected to whatever it was. And, Imaho did it in a year or two, but like for me, like I said, it was like 15 years where like I it was like, what stick? Like and I would look for sticks. I was like, oh, this one's nice. Oh, look, it's got pretty colors and it's like, and I was just like, I think I bought a few, I picked a few up, and I was like, this is the one for my altar. And I was just like, no, it really isn't. And again, I just got frustrated and let it go. And then in that kind of inner exhaustion, you could say, I just kind of gave up. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I recognize it. I see it. Basically I've connected to it. And that's really all it is just you have this moment of being able to connect, you know.
Is that flow also, is it what can be used to draw experiences and people to our lives?
If you are able to engage the flow, it's what people call synchronicity. You attract things, you're in the right place at the right time.
Just
You
happen.
you just attract things coming into your life, and it might not necessarily be like you walk into a room and this happens or that happens, but all of a sudden something's presented to you or something crossed your path, or like in the Buddhist tradition, for example, there's like special tools that kind of float around. And, in the Buddhist practice, they were like, well, these things are very old. Um, some of them are held back and sometimes for decades or even longer, but it's waiting for somebody to be able to have that connection. And they'll say, like, in a past life, you most likely own this item, or you were connected to this item, or you were a lama in a past life or something like that. And I don't know, that could be, but I think it's just a deeper level of being able to connect with something that is so precious or so alive. Because like those old relics, it's not that they're just supercharged. They're alive. There's different levels of being alive, but I mean it's um in different practices they would call it being spirited. Like there's a spirit that kind of comes through the item. It's not just like energy or prana or spiritual energy. There is that flow of the Buddha nature, the Christ consciousness, the whatever you want to call it, flowing through that item. And when you pick it up, it's like, ugh, it does something. It does something. It moves the person. It does something that no practice could. You might have a practice with it, but it's not about the practice. It's about being able to connect with that stream of consciousness or that flow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
Like even people who are not very sensitive, like when I give them like one of the Buddhist relics, or even remember our like one of our very first employees, she would sit there and she was not into any of that stuff, like not at all. And she would be sitting and putting the labels on the oils, and she'd hit the angels, and she'd start doing the angels, and she'd start getting like kind of, I don't know, like almost like she was like on drugs or something. She would get all like kind of wacky and out there, and she would start telling these just wild stories about her. She was just something was moving her, and she'd go, I don't know what it is, but when I hold these angel blends, like something happens, like so there's something to them because I feel all altered and I feel this, and you know, it's just the energy that's going through that blend. It's tied to the angel, but she would be sitting there holding it, not even smelling it, just putting the label on. And she was like, I can only do this for so long because I get too wacky. And, you know, that's the same idea. That's why like sacred items or holy items or going to a place and seeing, even might not even be like a statue or something, but you go to the Grand Canyon and it moves you. Like, it's like, you see these things and it's just something happens. It's because there's something flowing through it. There's a stream of consciousness that you tap through. And that also works in a negative way. Like, you get into situations where things are not going well and you can almost like feel something bad's coming. It's like because you're feeling the flow. You're feeling the flow of what's going to manifest. And like if you go back to the idea of the prophets back in the day, they could just read the flows really, really well. That's all it was, is they could just see like, oh, this flow goes there, this flow goes this. If I want this kind of information, I engage this flow.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much. That was uh, eye-opening and enlightening, I'll say.
Oh, good.
And I look forward to experimenting with
Yeah, I
other
would say experiment.
combinations.
Yeah,
Yes,
experiment.
thank you very much.
And Donita, your hand was raised.
Hey, Donita.
Right. Gosh, everything you spoke was is gold. It's
Oh,
just pure gold, and I so resonate to everything. Um, when especially this last one, when the the Kartika, you remember, I felt
mhm.
it before it even got here,
Oh yeah,
got
totally.
to me,
Yeah, yeah.
and it was just it's magical. So yeah, thank you for this share. It was
Well,
beautiful.
like I have a like on that same thing, I have this weird thing with my friend that's like he used to be a llama, but now he has a family and everything. But he's the guy that, I mean, to get relics, like they're coming out of monasteries. They're not like some you can go to the store and buy. Like, it's people are holding on to them, waiting for a special time or a person or, whatever it might be. And I can't tell you how many times where I'll go, what I really would like to get is like this tool, or somebody will show me like an item that like I was like, wow, I've never seen anything like it. Within a week or two, he'll call up and he goes, Greg, I found you something, da 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 da. And it's like an even more precious version of what it was. It's really crazy what it was. And I will tell you this. So one time I was teaching, this was many years ago, and I was teaching in Huntsville, Alabama. And I was in this little like church, and it was just a house converted. And it was a little weird. They had this library and they had different rooms and they didn't really have anything on the walls. They had a whole thing that they were doing about King Arthur or something, but they had this one picture of Christ and it was only about this big. And it was on the wall and it was painted a lot like the Tonkas are painted, like, like around the head, having the plate and it was just this really amazing picture. And I was teaching and I had to turn like this the whole time. And I couldn't stop looking at that picture. And, you know, people are saying like, is something wrong or something? I was like, no. And I just kept looking. So what I did is I pushed my chair back so that I didn't have to turn my head as much. But I was looking at that picture constantly. And I was like, they don't seem to even really care about it. It's just this weird random picture up on the wall. And I was like, you know, please don't be offended by this, but would you sell me that picture? Like, you know, whatever it was. And they were like, yeah. And I think they said they wanted like $35 or something. It was something really cheap. And I was like, okay, yeah. Like, you know, so I left it up there and I kept teaching. And as I was teaching, I started asking them questions about their church. I go, tell me about this church. Like, you know, because it was like nothing I'd ever heard of. And, you know, they're telling me about the church and this and that. And they go, yeah, it was started by this woman, Margaret something or Marilyn something. And I was like, huh. And he goes, oh, no, it's Alice Bailey. And I was like, excuse me. And so, if you don't know, Alice Bailey wrote all these books for the Theosophical Society back in the day and was given the information directly from Holy Master Joel Cool. And I go, this church was started by Alice Bailey? And they go, yeah. And they go, yeah, and that thing, she gave that to the church. That was a thing. She would bless it and consecrate it, and the churches that she opened, that was always on the wall. And I was like, and you're going to sell that to me for $35? And they go, yeah, nobody cares. And, you know, I had this moment of, I asked them a few more questions. That was the only relic that they had from Alice Bailey. And I was like, I would love to have this, but this anchors the energy for the church. Like this is you guys have to like cherish this. Like you have to, this is really something important. And I said, you know, I'm not going to buy it from you. You guys have to hold on to this. Don't ever do what I was just trying to do, like where I was trying to buy it. You know, I was being very polite, but soon as I turned that down is when all the relics started coming. Like I was like, you know, it was like I knew that it was not for me. It wasn't for my altar. It was for their altar. And like soon as I had that connection, all of a sudden I started getting these tonkas, and all of a sudden, like just out of the blue, all these things started coming to me. And I was almost like, so much is coming. I don't know what to do with it. So then I started offering it to some of my friends and stuff like that. But it is simply that alignment. It's just an alignment. That's all it is.
Mm.
Yeah.
Amazing. You know, I
But
was going to
that,
ask you.
that kind of goes with like you felt the Kartika coming or you felt something. It's an alignment. That's all it is.
Well, I mean, you know the treasures I've got, and before, like before a year before I got the car, I mean the purbas and the dorjes. Even a year before I got them, they came into my, you know, through
Mhm.
you, of course, but many blessings. I didn't even know about them. I didn't even have a clue about their existence.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, I often ponder and contemplate and it's like and wonder how when it's time, and when you align,
Right.
it's just flows,
Right. Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
just is.
Yeah. We got to get rolling here in just a minute, but is there like a quick question?
I was actually going to share quickly. Yeah, it was a quick one. You know, I shared yesterday that the class this weekend was very emotional for me, was very deep. And
Mhm.
after we did the jaw, I shared yesterday, after we did the jaw, I mean, I became a complete hot mess, crying, grieving, you know, just for the rest of the night. So I left the class. Last night, you told me to, and I can feel things are shifting and moving. I inhaled neroli. You told me inhale neroli on the
Mhm.
temples. I did on the jaws, on the jaws. I
Mhm.
did that, and within minutes, I ended up with a massive headache
Really?
around it, massive around the temple area. And I was like, okay, I drank water, I moved around, and I went to bed. But before I went to sleep, I did the true nature, and I did what you said, you know, the sex, solar, and brain.
Mhm.
And I went to sleep thinking that the headache will go away, you know. It didn't. I woke up with a massive headache, and I felt, you know,
You're
popping,
welcome.
pop. Thank you. And popping ears, and I could feel, I was like, oh dear Lord, is it my meng? You know, what did I do? But at the same time, I had this extra energy, and I woke up
Oh, good.
early, and I did
Yeah,
so
yeah.
much stuff around the house that I was, you know, not really motivated
Right.
for a long time. That the headache went away, and it cleared. It's just kind of cleared itself out. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to share. So I was like, what
Yeah.
was that about?
Stuff coming out of your prefrontal cortex. Yeah.
So shall I do Neroli again?
I give yourself a break for a day or two, but I'd try it again. But we
Neroli on
do
the
have to
jaws?
jump
I know.
over to the
Okay.
tantric practice, but
Okay. So shall I email
that's a
you?
good start. Yeah, yeah, that'd be good.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, you guys.